after we've looked at Jesus' genealogy according to Matthew, and we have seen that the way Jesus' birth came about was not just as John recorded, that the word became flesh, and most people think of it as such a clean and spiritual process, but it was a real process, a real life process. And in Jesus' family, there are all sorts of people, and we all can find ourselves in it. He's now kicking us off with the story itself. And he says, and many people will know that from a Christmas reading, that now the birth of Jesus the Messiah took place in this way. When his mother Mary had been engaged to Joseph, but before they lived together, she was found to be with child from the Holy Spirit. And of course, that is the famous virgin birth. It is a hugely controversial statement, but I just want to, we don't have time to look at a possible defense of the virgin birth, as it were, but I want to make a few comments that hopefully help us understand why Matthew is choosing to tell us about this. This is, in the continuation of the text, not an extremely important topic. Now, it may later be in our theology if we want to say that Jesus had to be born of a virgin to avoid the concept of original sin. But in Matthew's storytelling, this is not what he's getting at. I think there are two reasons that should have prevented Matthew from telling that story. And the first reason is, I'm sure that Matthew was aware that this virgin birth wasn't terribly original. There are a lot of people of whom it was said that they had been born of a virgin. And most famously, I think here is Alexander the Great. And there are tons of other examples in Greek and Egyptian mythology. Now, all those myths happen in the same way. There is a god that comes down from heaven, and he is having intercourse with a woman on earth, and out of that comes a son who is becoming some kind of superhero, just like Alexander the Great, who went on to conquer most of the known world. Now, that thought is as un-Jewish as it gets. Now, remember, Jewish monotheism says there is only one God, and one of the most terrible ideas would be that God could have a son. So this idea of a virgin birth is as un-Jewish as it gets and as unoriginal as one can imagine in that time. So there must have been strong reasons for Matthew to tell this story, and I think it was simply a case of him saying, look, I know if I had to write a perfect defense of my faith, I would probably not include that. But I'm sorry, this is just the way that the whole story took place, and I'm just faithfully recording what has happened. Now, I want to draw your attention to another interesting fact here. Let me just scroll up a little bit. This down here is Genesis chapter 1, starting with verse 2. Remember, we said in the first verse of Matthew 1 that Matthew said he's writing a new Genesis, he's writing a new creation account. And he is now continuing that. Genesis 1 verse 2 says that after God created the heavens and the earth was formless and empty, and darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. Now, this word hovering can also be translated as brooding, hatching. So the Spirit of God, and this is the idea of Genesis, that after God created this world, the world was then empty, and the Spirit of God was brooding, breeding, hatching, like an eagle would hatch over its eggs. So in the same way, the Spirit of God was brooding over the first life that was within that formless, empty, dark world. Now, in the same way, and I think this is the reason why Matthew is using Holy Spirit instead of just saying God, because he wants us to make that reference to the Spirit of God that was hovering. Now, the Spirit of God in the first act of creation has been breeding new life over the waters, and now again in the new creation, the Spirit of God was breeding new life, but this time in the womb of Mary.